Malcolm Blackwood's store glimmered like a gem in a sea of shadows. Polished display cases reflected a soft light, emphasizing every detail of the meticulously crafted interior. To Malcolm, this store wasn't just a place of business, it was his legacy. Everything he had built since returning from the military was embodied within these walls. Here, order and stability reigned, symbols of his dedication and resilience. When the doors burst open, as if struck by a violent gust of wind, the harmony shattered. Footsteps echoed across the space, sharp and deliberate. The sudden intrusion broke the fragile stillness of the store. Malcolm looked up from his desk, his dark eyes locking onto the uninvited visitors. 5 of them. Their swagger, their air of practiced dominance, their casual gait, all screamed of men accustomed to taking what they wanted. Leading the group was a tall man with harsh, angular features accentuated by a shadow of stubble. His gaze lingered on each display case, as though he was not just assessing the merchandise but deciding how easily he could claim it. "You Malcolm Blackwood?" The voice was sharp, carrying the weight of a challenge. Malcolm, a tall man with skin the rich hue of dark oak and broad shoulders that seemed built to shield, maintained his composure. He knew fear was the most exploitable weakness, and he had no intention of showing any. "Depends on who's asking," he replied calmly, his tone steady as steel. The man smirked, his grin laced with menace. "Name's Rico Vargas," he said, stepping closer to the counter. "I'm here to offer you a deal. We provide protection. I'm sure you wouldn't want anything to happen to this beautiful store of yours, would you?" He gestured, and one of his men casually swept a crystal vase off a display. The sound of shattering glass pierced the air, a violent note breaking the tense silence. Malcolm rose slowly, his full height imposing. His calmness was like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. "I run this store on my terms," he said evenly, his voice carrying a quiet strength. "If you're not here to buy something, you'd better leave." A heavy pause followed. Rico studied Malcolm as if he couldn't believe someone had dared to defy him. Then he shrugged, a gesture of feigned indifference. "Fine," he said, turning toward the door. "But I'll be back. And then we'll see what you're really made of." As they left, the tension in the room lingered like a storm cloud. Malcolm surveyed the displays, their reflective surfaces still shimmering under the light. His store, his sanctuary, was now under threat. But he had no intention of surrendering. This day marked the beginning of a new chapter, a fight not just for his business, but for the right to defy chaos itself. Malcolm couldn't let it go. The entire neighborhood felt like it was being sucked into a vortex of helplessness, where fear replaced the familiar hum of daily life. Broken shop windows, mangled signs, and the grim faces of business owners spoke louder than words. The air was thick with unease, transforming the streets into a silent battlefield. As he walked past several blocks, he noticed a familiar laundromat. Once a symbol of reliability and perseverance in the community, the small business now bore the same scars as the others: shattered windows and signs of destruction, a reminder of someone's brutal grip on power. The owner, gray-haired Larry, stood by the entrance, watching the tattered remains of his sign flutter in the breeze. Once an energetic and kind-hearted man, he now appeared broken. He didn't need to say anything, his body language spoke volumes. Fear of what might happen if he resisted was etched into every line of his face, every movement of his hands. Every stop Malcolm made confirmed his worst fears. The barbershop owner, Carl, had chosen to simply lock his doors. A month ago, his shop buzzed with activity, a lively hub of conversation and connection. Now it stood silent. Signs of intimidation were everywhere, but no one dared to speak openly. Malcolm recalled hearing Rico Vargas's name the last time he worked in this area. It lingered in people's whispers like the name of a dictator who controlled everything. Rico seemed to be extending his influence by preying on those who couldn't, or wouldn't, fight back. Every business, every family, every building within miles seemed to feel his reach. Memories of his time in the army flooded back. In those days, he was taught to protect the weak, to stand for justice. He remembered how they used to say that a true leader is one who defends his home, even at the cost of everything. Those words echoed in his mind as he approached another vandalized store, whose owner quietly disappeared upon seeing Malcolm. The situation began to make sense when Malcolm heard about an incident near a barbershop where suspicious dealings had been observed. The police ignored complaints, choosing to turn a blind eye to the crimes. Worse, rumors suggested they weren't just inactive, they were complicit in Rico's operations. This realization led him to seek out someone he trusted with such matters. His old acquaintance, Trey Knox, was a master of information. Malcolm knew Trey could uncover details even where nothing seemed to exist. Meeting him in a dim alley, Malcolm learned the truth he feared. Rico was indeed using police corruption to maintain his grip on the neighborhood. Malcolm faced a choice. His heart demanded action, but his rational mind warned that one wrong move could spell disaster. Yet he knew one thing for sure: inaction was not an option. His sense of duty, a legacy of his service, overpowered his hesitation. He thought of his fellow soldiers, who always said that justice wasn't a choice, it was an obligation. He began forming a plan, mentally mapping out each step. This was no longer just about protecting his store, it was a personal war for justice and the future of his neighborhood. Trey was a man who knew where the strings of truth were hidden, no matter how dangerous they were to pull. This time, he mentioned a nightclub called Royal. On the surface, it seemed like just another glitzy entertainment venue, but beneath its dazzling lights lay something far more sinister. According to Trey, the club wasn't just a hangout for the wealthy, it was the command center where Rico Vargas orchestrated his operations. Malcolm knew there was no uncovering the truth without taking risks. He quickly formulated a plan: stealth, observation, and evidence collection. Skills honed during his years of service came back into play. Arriving near the club, he dressed inconspicuously and stayed away from the main entrance. Inside, Royal was brimming with the energy of careless revelry, but Malcolm could see through the facade. Like a predator, he moved slowly through the crowd, blending in seamlessly. His sharp eyes scanned for familiar faces and movements. Then, through the haze of the club's atmosphere, he spotted a figure that radiated danger. Rico sat in the VIP section, surrounded by bodyguards. Malcolm kept his distance, trusting his instincts that something significant was about to unfold. It didn't take long for his suspicions to be confirmed. Within minutes, a man in an expensive suit joined Rico at his table, and Malcolm recognized him instantly. Detective Davis, a man rumored to have turned a blind eye to shady dealings more than once. Their body language, tense gestures, and hushed tones made it clear this wasn't a casual meeting. Malcolm discreetly activated a small camera concealed in the button of his shirt. Every move was deliberate, every moment captured. When Davis's hand met Rico's, in a gesture that resembled a transaction, Malcolm knew he had hit gold. This was all the proof he needed to understand just how deep the corruption ran in the local system. With his nerves stretched taut, he made his way toward the exit. Too many people, too many eyes. This place could become his tomb if someone realized what he was doing. But his fears materialized. Just as he stepped out of the club, two men in leather jackets blocked his path. Their menacing glares left no doubt about their intentions. They weren't there to talk. The first, large and imposing, lunged at Malcolm, but he reacted instantly, dodging and countering with a few quick moves. The second, attempting to strike, was on the ground within moments. Malcolm felt the rush of adrenaline surging through his veins. In that moment, he was once again the soldier he had been. After emerging victorious, he quickly disappeared into the night, leaving no trace behind. He knew he was now a target, but his resolve only grew stronger. The footage he had recorded was a crucial step forward, but fighting this battle alone was futile. Back at home, reviewing the footage and piecing together everything that had transpired, he realized he needed someone he could trust. Someone willing to risk everything for the truth. A name came to mind: Detective Lisa Carter. She was known for her unyielding character, someone who wouldn't sell out under pressure. With her, he could form an alliance. Her reputation was the deciding factor. Lisa had always worked for the greater good, and her ties to law enforcement could provide the support Malcolm lacked. Deciding there was no time to waste, he set out to find Lisa and show her just how far Rico Vargas's influence reached and how dangerous their mutual enemies were. Lisa Carter had always been a person of principles. Years of service had taught her to see not only the obvious but also the hidden layers beneath the surface. When Malcolm showed up at her door, she instantly knew he wasn't there for a casual visit. His determined gaze spoke louder than words. "Rico Vargas?" Her voice was tense yet steady. "Do you even realize what you're getting yourself into?" Malcolm gave a curt nod, pulling out his phone. Photos and videos from the Royal nightclub flashed on the screen. Lisa studied the evidence carefully, her expression focused but tinged with concern. "This isn't enough to take down someone like Vargas," she said, locking eyes with him. "He's got connections, money, people. Even if we hand this over, he'll find a way out. And you, Malcolm, you'll become his next target?" "I'm already a target," he replied calmly. "But if we do nothing, he'll keep destroying lives. I can't just sit and watch." Lisa knew there was no talking him out of it. Deep down, she admired his persistence, but she also understood the risks. Rico Vargas was not only a criminal mastermind but also a man protected by those in power. The police seemed unwilling to touch him, let alone dig into his operations. "If you want my help, we need undeniable proof. Something even his lawyers can't dismiss," Lisa sighed, sitting at the table. "And even then, Malcolm, we'll need a way to stay alive." "I have a plan," Malcolm said, pulling out a map of the city with several key locations marked. "According to Trey, there's a major deal happening at the port in 2 days. Rico will be there in person. We can document everything and corner him." "A deal?" Lisa raised an eyebrow. "And you think he won't bring his army? Did you see how many people were at the Royal? Now imagine what the port will look like." Malcolm met her gaze, his eyes filled with unshakable resolve. He wasn't someone who backed down. His belief in justice, in holding wrongdoers accountable, was contagious. "I'm not asking you to go in unprepared," he said. "But we have a chance. If we record the deal, we can prove his connection to drugs and corrupt cops. Lisa, this is our shot." She stayed silent for a few minutes, processing his words. Every argument, every photo on his phone, it all painted a picture that couldn't be ignored. Her principles, her faith in the law, clashed with a reality where people like Rico remained untouchable. "All right," she finally said. "But if we do this, we do it right. We'll need cameras, reliable transportation, backup plans for when things go south. And Malcolm, you need to understand this might be the end of the road for us." He nodded fearlessly. Together, they began devising a plan. Lisa used her connections to secure surveillance equipment. Malcolm meticulously mapped out routes and escape strategies. Every detail was considered, every risk calculated. Yet Lisa couldn't shake the unease. She knew how easily things could spiral out of control. But giving up wasn't an option. Malcolm had invested too much into this fight, and now she was part of it. All they could do was hope their efforts wouldn't be in vain. 2 days to prepare. 2 days to gather strength and ensure every piece was in place. Malcolm felt they were closing in on something bigger than just exposing a criminal. This was a battle for truth. After Malcolm decided to fight back, news of his actions spread quickly. His unofficial leadership among the shop owners became more evident. People who once feared even looking the thugs in the eye now looked to him with hope. But Malcolm knew such changes never went unnoticed. His jewelry store became a target again. This time, the threat arrived in broad daylight. A group of masked men, armed with bats, stormed inside. They weren't there to steal jewels. Their goal was destruction. Glass display cases shattered into tiny shards, furniture was overturned, and walls bore the marks of their blows. But Malcolm was ready. Before the attackers could cause significant damage, the owner of the grocery store next door burst in. He was followed by 3 more business owners, holding anything they could use as weapons, from brooms to metal pipes. "That's enough," one of them shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. "You're not scaring us anymore." The thugs turned, but their confidence began to waver. Malcolm stood behind them, pulling out his phone and aiming the camera at them. "You're being recorded," he said calmly. "Unless you want this online, you'd better leave now." Despite their numbers, The attackers weren't prepared for such resistance. One dropped his bat, the others followed suit, and they quickly fled. After the thugs left, the store owners gathered in Malcolm's shop. The atmosphere was tense, but for the first time in a long while, they felt strong. "We can't wait for them to attack again," said the barber, pointing to the broken display case. "We need to act." "I agree," Malcolm said, wiping dust off a shelf. "But we have to be smart. These aren't just petty criminals. They have connections and they know how to use fear." That's when the idea was proposed, not just to defend themselves but to strike back. They decided to pool resources and create a surveillance network. Cameras around their stores would track suspicious activity. Each of them was ready to assist neighbors in need. Soon, they learned that the attack on Malcolm's store was just the beginning. It was a message from Rico Vargas and his men. Anyone who dared challenge them would pay the price. "They're trying to scare us into silence," Malcolm told the group. "But I won't back down. We can handle them if we stand together." The proposal met with support. Everyone understood the risks, but the alternative, living in constant fear, was worse. In the following days, Malcolm and his neighbors took action. They fortified their stores, installed extra locks, and set up alarms. Lisa Carter also contributed, helping them coordinate with the few trustworthy officers on the force. But they didn't stop there. Malcolm proposed the next step, gathering evidence to prove Rico Vargas was behind the attacks. This required surveillance of his warehouses and the Royal nightclub. Using a network of local residents who knew how to stay unnoticed, they began collecting information. Every move the gang made was recorded. Videos and photos showed their men entering shops, collecting debts, and threatening owners. These materials became part of a larger puzzle, building a case against Rico. "We're not just protecting our stores," Malcolm told his team. "We're protecting our right to live without fear. And this is just the beginning." That evening, when silence finally fell, Malcolm stayed behind at the store to finish cleaning up. The shattered display cases were a stark reminder of how close the threat was. But now he knew he wasn't alone. The people had come together to stand against their enemy. And though the battle was just beginning, Malcolm felt they had a chance to change everything. As news of the growing resistance spread, Malcolm knew Rico Vargas and his men would not remain idle. The tension in the air thickened with each passing day. But instead of worrying, Malcolm and his team used this time to strengthen their positions. One evening, while repairing his store's shattered display cases, Malcolm noticed a black car parked in the alley across from his shop. Its tinted windows concealed the occupants, but something about it felt ominous. Pretending not to notice, he discreetly turned on his phone camera and captured the license plate. The following day, one of the shop owners, Mr. Rodriguez, came to Malcolm with troubling news. A note had been left on his door, reading, "You're next." It was a clear sign that the gang was escalating their intimidation tactics. Malcolm realized it was time for more decisive action. He met with Lisa Carter to discuss their options. Lisa proposed organizing a raid on the port warehouse Rico used for his operations. She had intel suggesting the warehouse might not only contain contraband but also evidence linking Rico to police corruption. "This is risky," Lisa said, pointing to a map of the port. "We have intel, but we need solid proof to take him to court." "We've been under threat for too long," Malcolm replied, crossing his arms. "If we don't act now, they'll keep tearing our lives apart." Lisa agreed swift action was necessary. She suggested leveraging the shop owner's network for reconnaissance. Among them was a retired sailor, Mr. Hopkins, who knew the port like the back of his hand. He volunteered to help with surveillance. A few days later, Mr. Hopkins returned with detailed information. The warehouse Rico used was indeed suspicious. Trucks arrived late at night, and their unloading was guarded by armed men. Malcolm decided it was time for surveillance. With a few volunteers, he set up cameras near the warehouse. The footage confirmed their suspicions. Weapons, drugs, bribes to officials, all were part of Rico's operations. Rico's gang, however, didn't sit idle. Sensing the pressure mounting, they became more ruthless. One night, Joe the barber's shop was set ablaze. Everyone understood it was a warning for the rest of them. Refusing to back down, Malcolm called a meeting to discuss their next steps. The barber, devastated, found support among the group, who offered to help rebuild his shop. "They want us scared and retreating," Malcolm said, looking at his allies. "But we need to show them their intimidation won't work." At the meeting, they decided to hand over all collected evidence to Lisa Carter. Lisa promised to present it to the district attorney but warned that only court-admissible evidence could be used against Rico. Malcolm knew this was a dangerous game. Any misstep could cost them not only their businesses but also their lives. Yet he believed their shared goal was worth the risk. The group agreed to tighten security around their stores and install additional safety measures. Soon, Malcolm received an anonymous message. It contained a photo of his house and a threat. If he didn't stop his campaign, his loved ones would be next. It was a personal challenge, but instead of fear, Malcolm felt a surge of determination. He knew this was only the beginning. The fight for justice was escalating, and Malcolm was ready to see it through to the end. Since the meeting and handing over evidence to the prosecutor's office, the situation had shifted. Lisa Carter and her department prepared a tactical operation to dismantle Rico's gang. The details were discussed late at night in the small office of Malcolm's jewelry store, which had become an impromptu command center for the resistance. Standing by a map of the district, Malcolm listened intently to Lisa. "We'll block the escape routes. The main team will take positions near the warehouse. Our goal is to take them down quickly before they can destroy any evidence." The operation began as the first group of officers took their positions near the port. Malcolm insisted on joining the mission despite Lisa's objections. He felt this was his battle, and he couldn't sit on the sidelines. His loyal guard, Gerald, a stern-looking man, stood silently by his side, radiating readiness for whatever lay ahead. As the group moved closer to the warehouse, gunfire shattered the night silence. Rico's men spotted the movement and opened fire, turning the operation into chaos. Armed with a handgun, Malcolm moved with the officers, covering the flanks. Amid the crossfire, he noticed one of Rico's men aiming directly at Lisa. Without hesitation, Malcolm fired first, neutralizing the threat. Barely catching his breath, he felt a strong shove that knocked him to the ground. It was Gerald who had taken a bullet meant for Malcolm by shielding him with his body. "Don't stop, boss," Gerald whispered, barely holding back the pain. "You have to finish this." Malcolm rose, rage coursing through him. He saw Rico and a few of his men attempting to flee in a car. Without a second thought, he ran after them, navigating by memory the map he'd studied earlier. Meanwhile, Lisa and her team stormed the warehouse. Among stacks of crates and containers, they found the corrupt detective frantically trying to destroy documents and hard drives. Pointing her gun at him, Lisa said, "The game's over, detective. You have a choice. Come with us or explain everything to Rico yourself." Realizing he was cornered, the detective raised his hands, dropping the papers. Chasing Rico, Malcolm found himself at an old pier. Among rotting planks and the sound of water, their eyes met. "You've gone too far, Malcolm," Rico said, pulling out a knife. "But you're not walking out of here alive." "No, you've gone too far," Malcolm replied, his muscles tensing. "And it ends tonight?" The two clashed in a brutal fight. Rico, relying on brute strength, attacked aggressively, but Malcolm, with his military training, remained calm and calculated. They exchanged blows until Malcolm found an opening for a decisive move. He took Rico down, pinning him to the ground. The sound of sirens cut through the air as Lisa and her team arrived at the pier. Malcolm stepped back, letting the police take Rico into custody. When it was over, he returned to Gerald, who had been evacuated to the hospital. Lisa approached him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've done what few could. Now we have a chance to end this." Malcolm looked at her, then at the horizon, where the first light of dawn broke through the darkness. This night had changed everything, but he knew the fight was far from over. The flashing lights of the police cars illuminated the pier, their glow reflecting off the still waters below. Officers escorted Rico in handcuffs, his face hardened with defiance, while the gathered crowd silently watched his fall from power. The battle was over, yet Malcolm felt no satisfaction, just a hollow exhaustion. His hands still trembled, his clothes were stained with dirt and blood, a stark reminder of the struggle he had just endured. From a distance, he observed as crates of evidence were loaded into police vans. Weapons, money, documents, and recordings, all the remnants of Rico's empire, would now be the foundation of a case against him. It was enough to dismantle his entire operation, but Malcolm knew the fight wasn't truly over. The ripple effects could either unravel the network of corruption or strengthen its roots in retaliation. Memories of the fight replayed in his mind. Rico had been quicker than expected, but Malcolm's anger and determination had tipped the balance. Each strike was a release of the frustration, fear, and pain caused by Rico's reign. When it ended, Rico lay disarmed on the ground, and Malcolm stood over him, not triumphant, just weary. At the hospital, Malcolm finally allowed himself a breath of relief. Gerald, his loyal assistant, who had shielded Malcolm from Rico's gunfire at great personal cost, had survived. It was a small but significant victory. Malcolm remembered the unwavering resolve in Gerald's eyes as he made the split-second decision to protect him, without hesitation or fear. The evidence collected at Rico's base was sent to the district attorney's office, and Lisa Carter meticulously documented every piece. Her resolve inspired confidence, though Malcolm knew that the battle for justice would be long and arduous. It could take years, or even decades, to see lasting change. Standing on the pier, Malcolm's thoughts drifted back to his jewelry store. Days ago, it had been a symbol of his hard work and dedication, but now it stood as a testament to his fight for his community. He never wanted to be a warrior, yet here he was, thrust into a role that endangered not only himself but also those he loved. He wondered if he could ever return to a normal life, or if such a life even existed anymore. In the distance, the faint glow of morning hinted at the passage of time, indifferent to victories or sacrifices. The neighborhood could rise from the ashes or fall further into despair, but now its people knew they had a choice. Malcolm had given them that much. Even if he couldn't find peace, his fight had planted a seed of resistance and hope. The silence of the pier was broken by the sound of footsteps as officers returned to their vehicles. The city seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would come next. Exhausted and battered, Malcolm climbed into his car, knowing one thing for certain: he had done everything he could. The faint scent of ash lingered in the air as Malcolm pushed open the door to his store. The once vibrant display cases were shattered, their contents looted or destroyed, leaving jagged shards of glass scattered across the floor. Empty shelves and overturned furniture bore witness to the chaos that had unfolded here. Yet, as Malcolm stepped inside, he felt neither despair nor anger, only a quiet determination to rebuild. He traced his fingers over the wooden counter, its surface marred by deep scratches and burns. This store had been more than a livelihood. It was a symbol of his resilience and identity. Now, it stood as a reminder of how fragile even the strongest foundations could be. But it was still standing, and so was he. Malcolm moved methodically, picking up debris and stacking broken pieces of his inventory to the side. The silence was almost meditative, broken only by the faint hum of passing cars outside. As he worked, his mind wandered to the faces of the people he'd fought for, the business owners who had suffered alongside him, the families who could now walk the streets without fear, and Gerald, who had risked everything to protect him. They were the reason he hadn't given up. A sharp vibration interrupted his thoughts. Pulling his phone from his pocket, Malcolm saw an incoming call from one of the shop owners he'd spoken to earlier. He hesitated for a moment before answering, unsure of what to expect. "Malcolm," the voice on the other end began, heavy with emotion. "I just wanted to say thank you. For everything. You gave us hope when we thought we had none." The words hit harder than Malcolm anticipated. He nodded silently, though the caller couldn't see it. "We all stood together," he finally replied. "That's what made the difference." The call ended, but it was quickly followed by another and then another. Each voice carried a similar message of gratitude and solidarity. Some spoke of reopening their businesses, while others offered to help him rebuild. The connections he had forged in the midst of adversity were now growing into something stronger, a community determined to protect itself. Malcolm set the phone down, overwhelmed but grounded by the outpouring of support. For the first time in weeks, he felt the weight of his actions beginning to lift. What had started as a personal battle had become a collective victory. The scars left behind would take time to heal, but they were a testament to the resilience of those who refused to be broken. A soft chime from his phone drew his attention to a message from Lisa. "Good news," it read. "All stolen goods have been recovered. Arrangements are being made to return them to their rightful owners. We'll make sure everyone gets what they lost." Malcolm allowed himself a small smile. It wasn't just about the goods, it was about the principle. Each returned item was a step toward restoring faith in justice, no matter how imperfect the system might be. He leaned against the counter, letting the silence envelop him once more. The store felt different now, not just as a physical space but as a symbol of something greater. It was a reminder that even in the face of destruction, there was always room to rebuild, stronger, wiser, and more united. As the light outside began to shift, casting long shadows across the floor, Malcolm realized he wasn't alone in his thoughts. The memories of the people who had supported him, fought beside him, and trusted him were etched into every corner of this space. Their stories were intertwined with his, and together, they formed a tapestry of resilience. Malcolm picked up a broom and began to sweep the floor, his movements steady and purposeful. Each stroke was an act of defiance against the chaos that had tried to consume him. The store would rise again, not as a monument to what was lost but as a testament to what was gained. For the first time in a long while, Malcolm felt a sense of peace settle over him. The battle wasn't over, and challenges still loomed on the horizon. But in this moment, surrounded by the echoes of a community's gratitude and the quiet resolve to rebuild, he allowed himself to believe that change was possible. And that, for now, was enough. The trial became a major event for the city. Everywhere, people discussed the high-profile charges against Rico and his crew. Those who had lived in fear and chaos finally felt that justice could prevail. The prosecutors spared no one, presenting detailed evidence of corruption and crimes. The video of Rico's clandestine meeting with the corrupt detective became the cornerstone of the case. None of the gang members escaped their fate, receiving the maximum sentences. For Malcolm, it was a triumph, but not without a bitter aftertaste. He had seen the gradual decay of order in his neighborhood and understood that one case against a gang wouldn't fix everything. Still, it was a beginning, a step in the right direction. The neighborhood began to change, slowly but surely. Inspired by Malcolm's actions and his team's efforts with Lisa, local activists launched an anti-corruption campaign. Newspapers and social media buzzed with headlines about the urgent need for reform. At a community center meeting, small business owners spoke out, declaring their commitment to cooperating with the police and maintaining order. Malcolm returned to his store, which was now more than just a place of business. It had become a symbol of resilience and community strength. Instead of closing its doors and leaving the past behind, he decided to restore it and turn it into a space where people could feel they were part of something bigger. The redesigned storefront and carefully arranged displays were meant to remind everyone that even after destruction, rebirth was possible. Lisa visited him at the shop while he was finishing the installation of a new sign above the door. "You should seriously consider it," she began, referring to her earlier offer. Her voice was earnest, with a hint of determination. She had proposed that Malcolm join the police force, noting that his skills and insights could be invaluable in combating crime. Malcolm listened but gently shook his head. "I can do more by staying right here," he replied. Lisa, though slightly disappointed, respected his decision. She understood that Malcolm had his own vision for how to bring about change. It had only been a short time since the gang's arrest, but Malcolm could already see the transformation. People were becoming closer, helping one another, and striving for a sense of order. Even the police showed more interest in addressing the needs of local residents. Trust, though fragile, was beginning to return. When Malcolm reopened his store, he felt a slight flutter of nerves. Outside, neighbors and friends had gathered to support him on this important day. The soft chime of the doorbell echoed as the first customers stepped inside. Malcolm greeted each one with a warm smile, feeling a long-absent warmth returning to these walls. He knew there was still a long road ahead, but this day was special. It wasn't just about reopening a business, it was the start of a new chapter for him and the entire community. Malcolm understood that the world had changed, even if only slightly. But it had changed, and every drop of sweat and blood had been worth it. Malcolm's story became an example for anyone facing injustice, a reminder that even the smallest actions can lead to significant change.